Hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we uncover a war that changed the fate of an entire continent but is rarely remembered. The Korean War, often called the Forgotten War, was far more than a border dispute. It was the first real clash of the Cold War, a violent struggle that divided a nation and drew the world's most powerful countries into a brutal 3-year conflict. In this video, we'll explore how the war began, how it was fought, and why its impact still echoes across Asia and the world today. The Korean War was a major conflict that erupted on June 25, 1950, when North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel and launched a surprise invasion of South Korea. Though the war is often referred to as the Forgotten War, its consequences were vast and enduring, especially in shaping the geopolitical structure of Asia. What began as a civil conflict quickly escalated into a full-blown international war, involving the United States, the Soviet Union, China, and a coalition of United Nations forces. The war represented one of the first direct military confrontations of the Cold War and became a battleground for the ideological contest between communism and capitalism. Despite the scale and the number of countries involved, the Korean War often receives far less attention than World War II or the Vietnam War, even though it claimed millions of lives and left the Korean Peninsula permanently divided. The terrain of Korea played a major role in shaping the nature of the war. Rugged mountains, harsh winters, dense forests, and narrow roads made movement and supply lines extremely difficult. Entire cities were flattened through bombing campaigns, and key strategic positions like hills, rivers, and ridges became the sites of some of the most intense battles. Battles such as those at Pusan, Incheon, and Chosin Reservoir showcased the brutality and complexity of the fighting. From the air, American B-29 bombers conducted massive air raids, often reducing towns to rubble. Naval fleets patrolled the coasts, launching strikes and supporting ground operations. On the ground, a combination of infantry, artillery, and limited tank warfare defined the battlefield. The Korean War was not only a test of firepower but also one of logistics, endurance, and adaptability in one of the most challenging environments modern warfare had seen. Inside each country involved, the war had significant political and social consequences. South Korea, still rebuilding after decades of Japanese occupation, struggled with internal political instability. North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and later joined by China, was fully committed to unifying the peninsula under communism. The United States entered the war not only to defend South Korea but also to contain the spread of communism, consistent with its broader Truman Doctrine. China joined after US and UN forces pushed too close to its border, fearing an invasion. As these powers clashed, the Korean people were caught in the middle. Millions of civilians were displaced, and many families found themselves permanently divided by the shifting front lines and eventual establishment of the demilitarized zone. The suffering endured by civilians remains one of the most tragic aspects of the war, as non-combatants became frequent victims of bombing raids, massacres, famine, and disease. The Korean War marked a significant evolution in the performance and use of modern military technology. It was the first conflict to see jet-powered aircraft engaged in large-scale combat. The American F-86 Sabre and the Soviet-designed MiG-15 became symbols of the new age of air warfare. Dogfights between these jets over MiG Alley became legendary in military aviation history. The use of helicopters for medical evacuation also began during this war, saving thousands of wounded soldiers who might have otherwise died. Artillery fire dominated much of the battlefield action, with both sides using vast quantities of shells in an attempt to dislodge entrenched positions. Tanks were used less extensively than in World War II due to the terrain but still played crucial roles in major offensives and defensive stands. The Korean War also featured intense amphibious operations, most famously at Incheon, where U.S. forces launched a daring assault that shifted the momentum of the war. The war's human cost was staggering, and for many civilians and soldiers alike, there was very little protection or safety. An estimated 5 million people died during the conflict, over half of them civilians. The extensive use of firebombing and napalm caused massive destruction and suffering. Entire villages were wiped out, and some cities, such as Seoul, changed hands multiple times, each time resulting in devastation. Prisoners of war faced harsh conditions, and there were numerous documented cases of mistreatment. Both sides committed atrocities, including executions, forced marches, and torture. The Geneva Conventions were in place, but often ignored in the chaos of battle. The United Nations involvement offered a framework for international oversight, but even this was limited in its ability to prevent the worst abuses. The only real safety feature was the eventual establishment of the armistice line, which helped halt the active fighting, though not the hostilities. The Korean War had several unique historical dimensions that made it stand apart from previous and later conflicts. It was the first time the United Nations sent a military force to defend a member state against aggression. This gave the conflict a level of international legitimacy, though the UN's decision-making was heavily influenced by the absence of the Soviet Union during the vote. The war also altered American military policy. It led to a significant increase in defense spending and a permanent peacetime military presence across Asia. It strengthened the U.S. South Korea alliance and laid the foundation for the U.S. to station tens of thousands of troops in the region for decades to come. The Korean War also deepened the Cold War divide, hardening attitudes on both sides and contributing to an arms race that would persist throughout the 20th century. It highlighted the importance of Asia in global strategy, shifting American focus from Europe to the Pacific and influencing later conflicts, particularly in Vietnam. The economic and psychological price of the war was immense. For the United States, the financial cost exceeded $30 billion at the time, equivalent to hundreds of billions today. More than 36,000 American soldiers were killed, and over 100,000 wounded. South Korea suffered the loss of more than 200,000 troops and millions of civilians. North Korea and China also experienced staggering losses, with some estimates placing Chinese military deaths as high as 400,000. The Korean Peninsula was left in ruins, with transportation networks, factories, and entire cities destroyed. Reconstruction would take decades. For the Korean people, the trauma was profound. Millions of families were separated by the new border, unable to communicate or reunite even after decades. Propaganda, suspicion, and military tension would replace the unity that once existed between North and South. The war's psychological toll created a culture of militarization and alertness that continues to define Korean society today. The war did not end in victory or defeat for either side, but rather in a stalemate. The armistice signed on July 27, 1953, brought the fighting to a halt but did not result in a formal peace treaty. To this day, North and South Korea remain technically at war, and the demilitarized zone is one of the most heavily fortified borders in the world. The conflict established a divided Korea, one capitalist and democratic, the other communist and authoritarian. Over the decades, South Korea transformed into a global economic powerhouse and modern democracy, while North Korea remained isolated, underdeveloped, and increasingly reliant on military threats, including nuclear weapons, to maintain its position on the world stage. The division continues to shape regional security, foreign policy, and global diplomacy. The Korean War, though often overshadowed in the public consciousness, changed the course of Asian history, cemented Cold War divisions, and left behind a legacy of conflict and division that persists to this day.